I'm Chris Lee, joined by Blake Lovell as we discuss the best offensive players in the SEC now that the season is over. I like to wait for the season to be over before we do our final ratings and teams. I've never understood why anybody does it differently, because bowl games and championship games, you'd think they'd matter, but that's how we roll here at the 14. We march to the beat of a different drummer. But Blake, it was really tough to pick these 14 players. So many good players in the league that we couldn't even fit in our top 14. And that's just for offense. Defense was the same way, by the way.
Listen, I'm excited for this one because I get to put you on the hot seat for this one. I get to put a lot of this on you in terms of how you figured out some of these 1 through 14. You're right, though. I mean, it's like I remember back when we were talking about this before the season started, and it's just one of those things where you're like, man, how do you possibly comb this down into 14, right?
Yeah.
It's so hard to do, and I think it's always fun, like when you get to that number 14 spot, because you and I probably, I mean, whether it's basketball, football, you spend more time trying to figure out who's going to be number 14, because it's like, we could add these other 8 to 10 guys on here and put them in that 14 spot. So I know that had to be probably a challenging part of it too, is figuring out, well, number 14, he's there, but you probably considered about, a dozen other guys for that spot until you finally decide on it.
Yeah,
so.
And look, the challenge for this list was that there were some really good players who didn't make our top 14. And offensive linemen always kind of get the squeeze, which kind of did in this case. I'll give you some names of good players who got left out. Receivers, that was a stellar group too. Like, I didn't have Mekhi Polk or Cedric Tillman, Dontario Drummond in there. 3 really good receivers who had terrific years. I think all went over 1,000 yards or were really close to it. So those guys didn't make it. John Mechie didn't make it either. Offensive lineman Michael Maietti at Missouri had a really good year, didn't make it. Darian Kennard at Kentucky didn't make it. They're a really good right tackle who's got an NFL future. Kenyon Green at A&M who played a couple different spots. So Tank Bigsby not on there. Tyron Davis-Price at LSU didn't make it. And Jalen Weidermeyer not on there either, although I didn't think he had a particularly good year. Too many drops when I watched him. But with that, how about we start it with the freshman, Blake?
I was going to say, number 14, like this is the big one, because this is the guy who earned the nod over those other names you mentioned, and little national championship flavor. So.
And Brock Bowers, if you haven't figured it out by now, is our choice. He had this year, 60 touches for 936 yards, because he did run the ball some too. But the big thing is 14 total touchdowns. And look, Georgia blew a lot of people out. That hurt his stats, his counting stats. But if you watch that guy, he was a stud, Blake. To me, he's got first-round NFL tight end written all over him. I have no idea where he's being projected a couple years down the line. But that kid was really, really good right off the bat. It's hard to do what he did as a tight end, and it's really hard to do it as a true freshman.
Well, and I mean, like you said, he's just someone that's, I mean, you just watched him this guy's a freshman. Like, I think you have to keep that in perspective here. And yeah, what he's able to do is just what a player. So, I mean, it's just, I can't, I mean, I think it's one where it's like, you'd have a hard time leaving him off this list. And that's where we talked about like the other 10 people. It's just, you got to find a spot for him on there. But I know after that, your next 2 you got here, I'm looking at little flavor of Kentucky. So
yeah, there is, and a couple more guys I didn't mention, and I had a really hard time. I think Devin Achane and Isaiah Spiller kind of stole stats from each other. I think that's the best running back duo in the league. I didn't have either of them in there. I had them in there most of the year. Probably not playing, but the bowl game hurt a little bit. And again, you had tough choices. Like, I just didn't feel like I could leave Brock Bowers off the list. Charlie Cross, another guy too, Mississippi State. But yeah, I went Chris Rodriguez at 13. Had some fumble issues at times, but mostly was really consistent. Wandel Robinson, though, a guy that just really could take the top off the defense for them and finish that season with an exclamation point right before he declared for the draft.
Number 11, I know someone, it's funny because we're recording this on Thursday, and there's already been talk. People are putting out their mock drafts and everything, and there's a lot of debate about where your number 11 is going to go, but I think there are probably a handful of teams in the top
Yeah.
five that could use a nice offensive lineman for about the next decade. So
Yeah, left tackles like Evan Neal are extremely valuable. I have a really hard time knowing where to put linemen, but he did a really good job of protecting Bryce Young's blind side. He's maybe going to go in the top 5 in the NFL draft, and he's 11 on our list, which tells you how good this league is. But yeah, Evan Neal, for better or worse, at 11, had a hard time knowing what to do with them. And the next guy, too, because Tennessee didn't win a lot of big games, but my goodness, Hendon Hooker was really good. And I think the thing that stood out to me, he accounted for 36 touchdowns and I think just 8 turnovers, which I think 5 of those were lost fumbles. Graded out pretty well on Pro Football Focus, but Hendon Hooker really and had a really good bowl game. I think I actually dropped him from where we had our last list, which wasn't really anything about Hendon Hooker as much as I felt like I needed to elevate some guys that had some good college football playoff showings. But Hendon Hooker, really just an underrated player for the Vols most of the year. He checks in at 10.
I remember when we were having those discussions about he was going to be Tennessee's quarterback. I don't know how much, like a lot of people did not think that he was going to be the guy, right? And it wound up
should have been the guy from day one. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of people were, thinking it was going to be someone else. So, yeah, that was interesting. All right. 9 and 8 here, national championship flavor as well. But I am more fascinated, although number 9, we know, is just an absolute beast. Number 8, though, is the one that I, we had this discussion, and I think it's going to always fascinating.
Number 8 is going to be the lightning rod of this whole list.
Well, and I think it's always fascinating, right? Because let's just go ahead. It's like Stetson Bennett's number 8. Number 9 is Brian Robinson from Alabama, of course. But I asked you, I was like, where? And this was the one. Like you sent me a list. I'm like, all right, let's talk about Stets here because he's the one that I think that a lot of people will look at and be like, man, he's probably very hard to place.
Yeah.
Just because, of everything involved. Like there's just so many different dynamics that I found it fascinating for you to even figure out where do you put this guy on this list. So,
well, Robinson, let's hit him quickly. Had a really good year. Came up big for Alabama in some big games. He's not Derrick Henry or Mark Ingram or some of the backs they had, but he really had a nice year. And I think he rushed for 204 against Cincinnati. Just carried them at times. Bennett, I did not have on our list the entire year and really didn't consider him. And frankly, to me, football is about winning games, right? And say what you want about Stetson Bennett. He came up big in big games a lot of times, did what was asked of him, really came up big in the national title game, threw that pick or had the fumble where you thought it's going to end for them, came back stronger than ever and led them to a national title. But here's the thing. He had 30 touchdowns, turned it over 8 times, and I get that he had weapons, but Blake, yards per touch, rushing and passing, yards per play, 9.4 yards per offensive play. That's better than anybody on the list. That's better than Bryce Young.
Yeah, I mean, I like
and by like a yard and a half better than Bryce Young. I'm not saying, look, if I thought that was the whole story, he would have been 1. But I just don't think you can leave him off this list, given how efficient he was and given the end result.
No, and I, like you said, I think that there's something to that. It would be hard to leave off the guy. Like you mentioned, the end result, that has to matter too, I think, and certainly some of this. So he's on there somewhere, and that is an interesting one for sure. All right, you're calling the Hogs with 7 and 6 here.
I am, and I even asked my good buddy Andrew Hutchison, who was the better player here, KJ Jefferson or Traylon Burks? I don't think Andrew ever really knew. I went with Burks 7 and Jefferson 6. I just think quarterback is your most valuable player at any position in sports. Jefferson had a really underrated year. I know people criticize him at times. Burks was a take-the-game-over receiver. And here's another one that I had trouble with, okay? Because he didn't end the season well. He wasn't super efficient in terms of yards per play, but Will Rogers is my 5 at State because, frankly, there were times that he carried them and led them to some big wins. And, look, he was a lot of their offense. They didn't have a running game to speak of. I had an issue with that one, and maybe Rogers at 5 was too much, but I just felt the way that he really willed Mississippi State to a couple big wins. It's not where you are at the end of the season, right? It's the body of work. I thought his was really good.
Well, I hate that number 4, which, Jameson Williams from Alabama, I hate that his season ended the way that it did because obviously, I don't know if it changes the outcome, but certainly having someone like that on the field for the entire game, offers some different challenges. But of course, he tore his ACL
Yeah.
the national title game. But I mean, again, how do you even leave this guy outside of the top 5? He's, I think, a
Yeah.
very deserving number 4 here based on his season. So.
Yeah, it became very evident to me, with apologies to Traylon Burks, that he was the most dynamic receiver in the league. And I think his production in postseason spoke for itself, as did what happened to Alabama's offense when he hurt his knee. 3, Tyler Beatty. He didn't play in the bowl game, but look, he had, 4 or 5 200-yard rushing games. He had 1,942 yards from scrimmage. What was it? I don't have the touchdowns. He rushed for 14 and caught 4 more, so that's 18 total touchdowns. Sat out the bowl game, but he had 322 touches by then. And for a kid who wants to go pro, I wish he'd have played in the bowl game, but I understand why he didn't. Okay, number 2 and 1, no surprise that our
Who are
Heisman
these guys
winner.
going to be?
Yeah, like everybody's. I don't think anybody stuck around for the suspense with this one. Bryce Young is one, and everybody knows that one, but Matt Corral, my goodness, that kid may have been as valuable to his team as anybody in the league, other than maybe Bryce Young. And you saw his value when he missed the bowl game. Or when he didn't miss the bowl game, he got hurt. But you saw what he meant to that offense when he was not there.
Yeah, I mean, again, who are you going to? I was joking, but who else are you going to put at 1 and 2 between these two? So pretty clear cut. But I know we're going to have some defense coming up too in our next one. So.
Yeah, we'll have that one up probably Friday. Anyway, thank you for listening to our offensive player ratings. Again, be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel and watch for our defensive player of the year, where we rank 14 candidates, give you honorable mentions. We should drop that one on Friday.